With all the talk of spending cuts and debt ceilings, you might have missed the news that this week a brand new federal agency officially starts up with 500 employees, soon to be 1,225, and a 2012 budget of $329 million. All those government workers and all of that money are supposed to stop you from being snookered on your next mortgage or credit card. So why do Republicans in the Senate say they'll refuse to confirm the president's pick to run the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau? Is the GOP just protecting its cronies in big banking? I'm PJTV's Scott Ott, and with me to read the fine print, from Monument, Colorado, a man who's such a smooth talker, he often snookers himself, the vodka pundit, Stephen Green. And from our home studios in Los Angeles, a man who'd like to have some cronies in big banking, the co-founder of DeclarationEntertainment.com, Bill Whittle. Well, men, President Obama this week tried to sidestep a confirmation battle in the Senate by picking someone other than Elizabeth Warren to run the new Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Ms. Warren's business card currently says, Assistant to the President and Special Advisor to the Secretary of the Treasury on the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. She helped to set up the agency that aims to make financial contracts shorter and simpler. And the president was confident she could do it, of course. After all, she honed her job title down to just 19 words. Well, when Republicans in the Senate said they'd block the nomination of a hyper-partisan, anti-business, central planning, egghead attorney from Harvard, the president said, would you consider one from the University of Chicago? After all, nominee Richard Cordray did win $40,000 over 5 nights on Jeopardy back in 1987.
In 1762, Ben Franklin was given an honorary degree by this English university. Richard.
What is Oxford?
Oxford is right also for $200 more.
Now, Steve, Richard Cordray, who, by the way, got his master's at Oxford, just lost his re-election bid for Attorney General of Ohio. If the folks who know him best fired him from a job where he claimed he was fighting to keep the big banks honest and to protect the little guy, why did the president pick him to run this new consumer protection agency?
Yeah, you know what this administration always makes me think of? Remember the Peter Principle is a famous business management book back in the late 60s, early 70s. Dr. Peter wrote that, and I think this is a quote, in a hierarchy, every employee tends to rise to the level of his incompetence. That you can't find out where someone's skills run out until you've promoted him too high. Well, look at this administration. You've got Tim Geithner running the Treasury despite not one day of private sector banking experience, and the Treasury, of course, is empty. We had Van Jones, the green job czar, and the only job he ever had was spouting communist propaganda. He destroys jobs. And we have a president who blew through $100 million trying to help Chicago schools, and every single dime of that was wasted. With this bunch of bozos, the Peter Principle was optimistic. They've all been promoted way past their level of competence. Way past.
Which is, of course, why Cordray is hoping to run for governor in a couple of years in Ohio. Bill, when the president announced the Cordray nomination, he made his case, again, for the creation of this new federal bureaucracy. Take a look.
One of the biggest problems was that the tables were tilted against ordinary people in the financial system. When you get a home loan, it came with pages of fine print. When you got a credit card, it was as if the contract was written in another language. These kinds of things opened the door to unscrupulous practices. Loans with hidden fees and terms that meant your rate could double overnight. It led to people getting mortgages they couldn't afford, and it put honest businesses at a disadvantage. And it encouraged dangerously risky behavior on Wall Street, which dragged the economy into the mess that we're still trying to clean up.
Now, Bill, given that sound case that people can identify with, doesn't it make sense that the federal government should do more to rein in this rapacious industry?
Yes, that's the source of all of our solutions in life, is having the federal government do more. Before we continue on with this little goat rodeo, can we go back to that picture of Cordray for a second being introduced by the president? Ladies and gentlemen, take a very good look at that picture. Look at that man's face. That look is the look that you have on your face when you realize that the next thing you are going to see is the bottom of a bus someday. I'm telling you, mark that expression. That is the face you have on your face when you realize, I'm going to be looking at the bottom of a bus before this administration is finished. Now, as far as the financial markets being tilted against the little people, we got into this trouble because the financial markets were tilted by law in favor of the little people. All of the problems that we got into with the financial crisis were due to people being given loans that even the banks knew they could not repay, but they were forced to be giving these loans by the federal government, who told the banks, if you guys default on these, we'll cover them. So it's a no-lose situation, and that's where we are today, right? So look, the only thing in here that I think makes any sense at all in the midst of adding yet another federal bureaucracy to this debt-laden kudzu corpse that we call the federal government is this. I am in favor of having contracts being written in the most understandable English possible. I think that's a really good idea. But folks, ultimately it's your responsibility. If you don't understand the contract, maybe you shouldn't sign it.
Well, Steve, the president makes it sound like the entire financial crisis was caused by fine print. Were that many Americans really fooled by greedy bankers, or were many of us willing fools?
Well, first of all, the fine print is there to cover their asses because of all the regulations. Regulations inspire the fine print, all right? And Bill only got a third of this in his answer. There are two other parts. There's a book on this you need to read. It's called The Big Short. I can't remember the author's name, but he wrote the one on Wall Street in the 80s that was so devastating. And you would not believe the depths and the heights of the corruption in the subprime loan industry. Bankers would tell the borrowers what the borrowers should tell the bankers to get their loans. No proof of anything required. Now, the banks did this because, one, as Bill said, the federal government told them to. That's a Community Reinvestment Act that in the 90s was changed under Clinton to make banks give loans to people who couldn't pay them. But then the banks were all too big to fail, so they knew they'd get bailed out. But Wall Street started buying these mortgage securities where all these mortgages were wrapped up together, the good loans and the bad loans, as if the good loans would rub off on the bad ones and magically reduce the risk in these packages. These things were bought and sold as AAA instruments, supposedly as good as gold, because everybody figured they'd be safe, except for the poor schmuck stuck with a mortgage he can't pay back on a house that's now worth less than he paid for it. It's insane.
Well, Bill, 44 Republicans in the Senate have said they won't confirm any nominee as director of this agency until the agency is restructured. They say it should be run by a board, like the FCC, not by a single director. They want Congress to oversee its budget, not the Federal Reserve. They fear that its sweeping regulatory powers might be used to kill banks. Is the GOP just protecting its crony capitalist campaign contributors?
I think it's penetrated the American mind that this cannot continue. I think there's not an American out there today. There are a lot of people who want it to continue, but I don't think there's an American out there today who honestly thinks that this nonsense can continue. Instead of adding new government agencies, the only salvation we have is to scrap entire ones that have been there for 20, 30, 40 years. The Department of Education needs to go. The Department of Energy needs to go. Laws to protect consumers are already on the books, and the most vital of these should probably stay in simplified form. Laws against fraud have been there since there have been human beings trading goat skins. For God's sakes, we are going to add yet another agency that starts at $350 million and will be $350 billion by this time in 3 years. And it simply boggles the mind that people are even having this discussion. The GOP should not only not fund this agency, they should be saying no more new agencies, and which old ones can we get rid of?
Yeah.
The hint is
and
most
I'd be
of
in
them.
favor of a goatskin cap as well. Steve, Elizabeth Warren reportedly plans to go back to Massachusetts and mount a challenge to Senator Scott Brown, who just kind of filling out the rest of Teddy Kennedy's term. Should Brown be nervous, or is Warren too far left even for the Kennedy Commonwealth? And wouldn't it be better for the Republicans, frankly, to have her heading this agency rather than meddling in legislation in the Senate?
Ooh, I'm not sure where you stand on that last bit. I have the feeling we'll find out. You know, if you have Elizabeth Warren in the Senate, that's just one more super liberal senator from Massachusetts, and Scott Brown is no conservative. We can deal with that. But putting her in charge of writing, it's almost 400 new banking regulations, and it covers everything from credit cards to how many women, minorities, whatever the banks have to place in upper management, regardless of skill. No, that is just too scary to contemplate. The problem is Cordray is just Warren in pants. It's heads they win, tails we lose again.
Stephen Green hosts Hair of the Dog, The Week in Blogs, and Coast to Coast Tea Party here on PJTV.com. You can follow him online and on Twitter at Vodka Pundit. Don't miss his trifecta this week as debt ceiling talks come down to the wire. Well, Bill, how can Republicans be the voice of justice for the little guy, a voice that shares the outrage at deception and abuse, but prescribes solutions that guard individual liberty rather than expanding government?
It's extremely difficult when, as Andrew Klavan says all the time, Barack Obama knows that no matter what he says, the press will shield him. They will not only be neutral towards him, they will shield him. They have made the businesses responsible for this mess, that they're the evil villains, those greedy Wall Street fat cats. And look, Wall Street went after the money, and when you are told by the government to give loans to people who can't repay them, and if they can't repay them, we will pay them for you, then it makes financial sense to give bad loans to everybody. But this part of the equation is never mentioned, so we have an enormous hill to climb, Scotty. People need to be constantly told by the GOP who the real villains here are.
Bill Whittle's company just started shooting its first citizen-produced movie, and you can get behind the scenes at DeclarationEntertainment.com. And Bill's Afterburners series returns to PJTV this month. Good news all around. Caveat emptor. Let the buyer beware. It's the watchword in a free marketplace designed to encourage vigilance on the part of the customer and integrity from those who sell. But when the sign in the market says, in effect, caveat legislator, your government will watch out for you, then you develop a sense of security based on promises from above. You ignore the fine print because you assume someone in Washington must have checked it out. You welcome the calm assurance from the lender that if worse comes to worst, the government will bail you out. This risk transfer scheme moved the liability and responsibility from the customer and the company to the unwitting and unwilling cosigner, the taxpayer. Richard Cordray may be an intelligent man who seems to have all the answers. But if the Republicans don't restructure this Consumer Finance Protection Bureau, it will put our economy in even greater jeopardy. For Bill Whittle, Stephen Green, and the entire Trifecta crew at PJTV.com, I'm Scott Ott.